Welcome to the Hey Boomer Show, which is live every Monday on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and then available by the very next day on your favorite podcast players. My name is Wendy Green, and I am your host for Hey Boomer. And Hey Boomer is the show for those of us who believe that we are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. It is for lifelong learners who are finding meaning and purpose in their lives at this stage and living their best life. And you don't want to miss out on any future enlightening, thought-provoking episodes like the one we're going to have today. So I am going to encourage you to subscribe and to invite your friends to subscribe to the Hey Boomer email list. It's very simple. You go to bit.ly/heyboomer-subscribe. You'll get 2 emails a week. That's all. No spam, I promise. But you also will not miss out on any of the wonderful events or speakers that we have every week. And speaking about thought-provoking shows, this episode is going to give you lots to think about. The title of this episode, Aging Family and Moves. So what do you want to hear about? This is a conversation that affects all of us. I will be talking to our guest, Margit Novack, about how our relationships change with our siblings and our parents and even ourselves as we age. And we're going to talk about how the relationship with our children, also our adult children, change as we age. And then throw in the discussion about moves. When is it appropriate to think about downsizing or moving into senior living for ourselves? And what about when we think it's the right time to move our parents into senior living? And what happens with the family dynamics in those discussions, especially if there are tensions in the family or you throw in step families. So lots of areas where this can get complicated. And Margit has so much experience in this. She's widely recognized as the founder of the senior move management industry. And as such, she has had a front row seat to how families respond to moves. Margit has recently stepped away from her work in the move industry and is pursuing a new goal and a new dream as an author, a speaker, and she was recently recognized as a champion of a revisioned picture of aging by EncoreNetwork.org. And she recently published a new book called Squint, Revisioning the Second Half of Life. Really an excellent read, very personal, easy to relate to. So I would encourage everybody that is looking at this second half of life and family relationships and moves. It's a great resource. But speaking of vision, right before I bring Margit on, I want to remind you all that tomorrow, the 13th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm offering a free spotlight session to learn more about the 6-week group coaching program, What's Next? And we're going to have some of our alumni will be there. I'm going to give you some more information about the program and what's involved in that and what you're going to get out of it. And we might even have time to do a little exercise in there. So you can go to bit.ly/heyboomer_what's_next to register for that. So that's tomorrow at 4. With that, let me bring Margit on. Hello, Margit.
Hi, Wendy. How are you?
I am so glad that you are joining us today because this is really a lot of important topics we're going to cover.
We are.
Yeah. So I want to start with your whole idea of revisioning the second half of life. Loved your book. And how it kind of builds on our perception, our internal perception of aging, the external perception of aging, and how we feel about older people. So do you have some thoughts on that?
I do. Viewpoint, how we feel about aging is way more important than most people understand. Studies, and there have been multiple studies that have confirmed that people who have a negative image of what it means to grow older have much poorer health, greater morbidity, earlier death. The impact of how you see aging is as powerful as not smoking. I mean, they're saying it's over 7 years of life. Now, obviously, these are broad studies. It doesn't mean that every person is impacted that way. But how people view aging then becomes self-fulfilling prophecies of how they live their lives. And I do believe that this is a stage where people need to be intentional about living well. Maybe you can get away with postponing health or nutrition or sleep or relationships during many of the decades preceding your 70s and 80s and 90s. But this is the end of the ability to postpone. I listened to someone about 2 years ago who said, the day you leave your paid job, you start your unpaid job, which is fitness training and strength building. And it really made me realize that part of my job is to be intentional, to make sure that I am trying to stay fit. My ability to enjoy life, to instill drive, to go kayaking, to be able to walk without pain. Well, these are the things that give my life a lot of enjoyment. But I have to take some responsibility for doing the kind of exercise and fitness and nutrition that makes it possible for me to do that. It doesn't come easily at this age. I really enjoy them, but I have to accept responsibility. I call it intentionality. That's part of my job. And that's why I also view it as a really good time, because I still feel very in control. And that I both have opportunities and responsibilities about how my life is conducted. And I'm in control of how my life is conducted. And I think that's one of the feelings we want to have as we get older.
Yeah, I like the way you say that, because it is about responsibility. And I think we have been responsible adults up until this point, but now the responsibility shifts some into more self-care.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, so I think that's important. So talking about ourselves and, what's next and where are we going? I know you have a beach house that you like, and you have also downsized. And, I look around what I have, and it's probably too much, but it's an emotional decision to downsize. So how have you found people kind of navigating that?
Well, I think the first way people navigate it is to come up with the obstacles to doing it and therefore not do it. Every time I would talk to an audience about downsizing, someone would raise their hand or speak up and say, well, the reason I can't downsize is, what do I do with the 4 boxes of artwork that my kids did in elementary school and my grandchildren? How can I part with those?
Right?
And the answer is, don't worry about those. You have 85 cartons of other stuff that is not the artwork your kids did or your grandchildren did that you can part with. But people bring up the challenges as if they're an obstacle. They are, but they kind of use it as an excuse not to proceed with everything they can do, which is usually substantial. The other thing that I often talk about is not to have donation perfectionism. There's 2 things that also stand in the way of downsizing. One is feeling that everything they have is worth a lot of money. And in most cases, it's not. It's not related. Today's worth is not related to what you paid for something. And the other thing is it has to go to the perfect place. So see these art books? They need to go to an art school for orphaned girls that live in Uganda or something.
Right. Perfect.
They find really They seem like perfect solutions, but they're very time-consuming solutions that end up either never happening or taking so much time to find the right home for one thing. I think they're losing perspective that the purpose of downsizing is not to find the perfect home. The purpose of downsizing is to move on for what's next in your life.
And do you find that
energy on the wrong thing?
Yeah. Do you find that people move from their bigger home to downsize to senior living, or do you have to take that interim step?
Most older adults don't live in senior living. They live in their home, or they live in an apartment or a condo. It's a relatively small percentage. I do have a cottage in senior living, although most of my time right now is not spent there. And I think people will say, I want to stay in my house, in part because the task of moving from the family home is the hardest move. It's filled with emotion. It's filled with letting go of a phase of your life. And they're usually big downsizing projects. Many homes have basements and attics and garages. So there is a lot of stuff. And I think part of the I'm not leaving here is not because I love my life. Often by the time someone's in their 70s and 80s, the people that the neighbors they enjoyed and who came to visit them for cookouts no longer live there. They don't know many of the people on their block. They don't do as much as they used to do. Life is harder. Most homes today aren't designed for first floor living.
That's true.
But it's such a big project that most people will say, this is what I know, and I'm not going to change.
Yeah, change is hard. And I think when we get older, change is harder.
I think it is. The ironic part is when you get older, change happens whether you want it or not.
Oh, say more about that.
Well, we change. Our bodies change physically. Our children and grandchildren are at different phases. We're going to change in what we're able to do. And for most of us, that's a gradual change. And we may not be that aware of it because for most of it, it's cumulative. So each year, whatever the impact of aging is, may be a little bit bigger. But for most of us, even people with chronic diseases or chronic conditions, I don't want to call them diseases because it makes it seem like we're patients, and we're not.
Right.
We're people who live with something that we live with. But for some people, the changes are really abrupt.
Yeah.
And especially when they get an acute illness or there's a fall, some kind of thing happens acutely, and then they're thrust into a very different lifestyle. So change, when you're older, change is going to happen whether you accept it or not.
Yeah.
It's the pace of that change, and whether you're planning it and figuring out how to thrive, or you're just experiencing it and doing the best you can under the circumstances. But I don't consider them the same thing. One is more reactive and one is more proactive.
And you talked about in the beginning, you liked the idea of having some control over being responsible for your health and your self-care and, what you were doing with your time. But there are situations like you talked about, someone may fall or get sick where we look at some of our aging parents and we have to make that decision. It's time to move you into senior living or assisted living or something like that. And as a senior move manager, I'm sure you ran into a lot of emotional family things around that. So how is the easiest, best way to handle those situations?
Well, I think for families, the interest in having someone move is primarily to mitigate risk, to reduce risk. There are a lot of reasons to move, and risk is one of them, but only one, because thriving is about way more than reducing risk. I think the adult children will see the stairs, or I don't know if they appreciate and value enough the impact of having people to have meals with, of having opportunities to socialize, of having more nutritious meals, of having more opportunities for fitness. I think there are a lot of adult children who see, well, I'll have less to worry about if mom lives in X. And that is true. And I get that. I don't think they understand all the benefits that could accrue in a different living environment. I think there is a big perception. It may be voiced in terms of it's better for you, mom, but it's often it's better for me. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just don't know that it's acknowledged. And the ironic part is, I think if kids talked more about how they feel or what their worries are to their mother or their father, instead of saying, Dad, you could fall, or they voice it as, these are all issues that you're facing, Dad, instead of, you don't know how much I worry about it. I think about it at night. I could spend more time doing things with you instead of for you. And I think that's a really important difference. If many adult children are involved in the lives of their aging parents as they get older, and it may be food shopping, it may be taking them to go to the doctors, it may be a variety of different things that they facilitate. But when your parents have some of these things done for them, then your time can be spent, let's go for coffee, instead of let me take you to a doctor's appointment. And I remember, we may talk about when I helped my aunt move, but
yes, I want to talk about that.
I had flown down to Florida for a weekend and to help her move, doing everything that I knew as a move manager I shouldn't be doing. And she said, I had been there for 3 full days, and she said, but we haven't had any time together. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? I've been here early in the morning. And she said, we haven't gone to lunch. We haven't sat and talked. That's what she wanted out of my visit.
Yeah.
So I think one way for adult children to explain to parents is, I want to do things. I want us to do things and go places. I don't want my time. I don't want all of our interaction to be me doing things for you.
Yeah, I like that. And, talking about your aunt, I think, and being responsible, having some control, I think as adult children, or in your situation with your aunt, you just want to do what needs to be done to get this done.
That's
how
right.
do you slow down enough to also give some control to the older person who's going through the move?
Giving control back is really important. And it's interesting. I remember when my son at 4 or 5 had a cut on his head and was taken to the ER because it had to get stitched. And they said to him, we're going to stitch your head, and this is how much thread is going to be used. So whatever it was, he showed it. And he said, that's too much. And they said, okay, should we shorten it by this amount? And he said, yes. Aww. And that enabled him. I thought, how wonderful they are.
Absolutely.
They gave him some control, and then that assuaged his fear.
Yeah.
And I think it's really easy for us to say, this is what we're going to do, or we say, you don't need this, or you, that's really common. Mom, you don't need these dishes. You don't need. There are some things that can't be said. When my aunt was moving, there were outfits she wanted to take, and they were outfits from decades ago. They were lovely, but she at that time was wearing disposable underwear. I couldn't say to her, Betty, they won't fit over your underwear. That would make her present situation so in her face.
Yeah.
I found another way to say, that's not what they're wearing now. And then she wanted to be pretty current.
Uh-huh.
So telling the truth, and I'm not saying lie, I'm saying find another way to work around something. I also think with adult children, it's really important not to correct your parents. It is so common. I would go to a home and I would say, I'm trying to establish rapport. So I would say to the client, how long have you lived here? And she would say 37 years. And her daughter would say, no, Mom, 34. And I'm thinking, does that matter?
Difference, right?
She lived here for a long time. Did you see her face when you corrected her? She stopped talking. She was ready to tell me a story. Another time the mother is now taking me for a tour and showing me pictures on the wall and said, this is my daughter, Wendy. And she goes, no, that's Barbara. And again, it just caused the mom to close down completely, that being corrected. And I get the impulse of adult children to correct their parents because they have a hard time accepting those lapses of memory, which
Totally
really
true.
aren't that significant.
Mm-hmm.
And the corrections come at a high cost versus just go with the story, because the story that they want to tell is important. And people go, I've heard that story 50 times. And I feel like saying, if she's told the story 50 times, it's not because she thinks you don't know it. It's because she enjoys telling it.
Yeah.
Like they don't get the purpose of the story is it makes her feel good every time she tells it.
Yeah.
Not because you don't know the story.
And I'm so glad you brought that to the awareness, because one of the things we talked about earlier about evolving as we develop and age is the changing awareness. And I find that with my mother, she's very hard of hearing, and there'll be times she'll say something that's like completely not in the conversation. And I have in the past jumped in to correct, and I'm now learning. It's okay. Just bring her back into the conversation, But it is difficult.
It's also interesting how incredibly patient we can be when it's not our own family member.
Very different, isn't
Way
it?
nicer. When I had a client that I knew had hearing impairment, I would make sure I was staring directly at their face the whole time I was talking to them. If we were talking about a closet in the bedroom, I didn't turn my head to the closet because I knew that she would understand me better if she saw my mouth. It's not lip reading, it's more speech reading. They have more information.
Right.
I have zero patience with my husband. And he would say, and you don't look toward me. You're busy with your head in the pantry when you start talking to me. I did much more intentional listening with clients than I do with my spouse. And then,
It's so
I
true.
get mad, he gets mad at me and I say, you're grumpy, and it's just interesting.
It is interesting. It is easier when we're not related. And yet those are the people that are the most important.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so let's go from there to siblings and step families. And, I have a very challenging relationship with my brother, as you had with yours.
Yes.
And fortunately, my mom has spelled a lot out in her will. But I still worry, how is this going to be when we need to, come together with decisions?
I wish I could tell you that I have great hopes, but I don't. And I said this in the book. I think families that have great relationships among siblings are usually able to work out everything after a parent passes away. And families that have pre-existing challenged relationships often see the same issues they had before the death resurface. I mean, it's got a new context, but ultimately they're the same issues. It was interesting to me. I have two brothers, and I was estranged from one of them for 4 decades. I guess it began when we were both in our 20s. There were words at my wedding, but there were a lot of things that focused around what happened to my mom's belongings. My mother died when I was 27. I didn't think he would take care of her blue sofa properly or her china closet. But ultimately, I'm not sure as I look back that I had the right to make those assumptions, although I certainly did. There were words, and then there were more words, and then we really didn't talk. And when I was about 65, a friend told me a story about two prisoners who were horribly abused by their jailers. And then they were liberated, and the two prisoners, former prisoners, were talking, and one said, "I have forgiven my jailer, my guard." And the other prisoner said, "I could never do that." And then the first one said, "Then you're still imprisoned." And just like that, I decided I wanted to go visit my brother Michael. And it wasn't about I wanted to forgive him. It was, I'm 65 years old. I've been angry at him for 40 years. It's time to just move on.
Right.
So I did visit Michael, and he wasn't the ogre I remembered. Ironically, the blue sofa that I was sure he wouldn't take care of, he still had 40 years after
40
my mother's
years.
death. 40 years after my mother's death, well taken care of. I would not have kept a royal blue plush velvet French provincial
Probably
for 40
not.
years.
Right.
And I went back and found the letters I'd written to him in my 20s. And they were incredibly arrogant and judgmental. And I said, I'm not that person anymore. And he's not the person the horrible person that I made him to be. We are never going to be close siblings, but I don't consider him estranged or an enemy. And I began doing research about sibling estrangement in particular, and it's way more common than you would think. You just don't hear about it. People talk about the sibling, they have a good relationship. They generally don't talk about estrangements, estranged parents, estranged siblings, or estranged children. But the research said that often attempts at reconciliation don't succeed because no one's willing to take blame for what occurred. And what was interesting to me is I never tried to go back and re-examine what had occurred. To me, that was a slippery slope. There was no way we weren't going to get back where we had started if we went there. We just moved on and said, that's 40 years ago. What we're doing now is just interacting as people. So I'm glad we're no longer estranged. And we have moved on.
Yeah, I think that's the way to do it. You know, there are many topics that my brother and I will not talk about just because but it is a challenge for sure. I'm curious about what might be some of the best advice you've received over the years from some of the older people or their families that you have managed their moves for.
One of the things I always remember is a woman who was I think she was in her early 90s, and she was moving from an apartment to, I think it was assisted living in her case. So we're going through things in her pantry and her freezer. So the things in the pantry are all dated. She dated every can of beans and corn and anything she brought in.
Wow.
With a magic marker. So we knew this is this is 5 years old, this is 7 years old. And we're saying, this is expired. And she said, the taste is fine. They're not bad for you. They just might not have as much nutrients. So then we're in her freezer and we see here's chicken breasts that are 3 years old or 5 years old. And we said, this is bad for you. If she goes, we said, it's not going to taste good. And she goes, I saute it with some butter and some salt and pepper. It's fine. And we said, it's not good for you. She goes, I'm 92. How bad can it be? And I love that because it was such a good lesson in our ability to judge versus people's ability at every age to want to say, I'm in control. This is the way I've done it. I have assumed some risk, but we all assume risk. We assume risk when we get in the car. We assume risk when we're on our phone in the car.
Right.
Or if we've had, life has some risks. She's been doing this behavior and she wasn't going to have us scare her out of a way she wanted to live. So it was a good reminder that I don't need to be her parent. I'm here to help. She's my client and I'm here to help her accomplish one of her objectives, which is to get moved. I'm not her parent. And I think the challenge with so many adult children is that they start acting like the parent. And no one wants to be parented, no matter what your age is.
Right. That's right. We push back. We push back for
Well, when
sure.
you have small children, you can say words like "you should." And then as we try to forge an adult relationship, we learn to zip it. We stop using to our adult children words like "you should do this," "you need to do this," because they don't want to hear it. And that's how we then forge our grown-up relationship. And somehow when the kids get to a certain age and they start giving back to the parents, you should do this, you need to do that. They are using toward their parents the same vocabulary. They're just about stopping to, the 60-year-old adult child is now won't use it with her daughter, but now uses it with her mother.
It's so interesting, isn't it? I know your children teach you, don't do that. Don't talk to me that way. And then we do.
And then they're doing it with their parents.
Yeah. A question is
why there's resistance.
That's right. Because the big thing, a big message that's coming through all of this discussion is give people that respect and control. Everybody needs to feel that. So a question came in, Margit, about letting go of stuff, and we briefly touched on that, but do you have a process or some tips that you help people go through?
I do. So these will be fast. One, don't start at the hardest place. People often they think, well, this is the real problem. I recommend start with something that you're pretty sure you're not going to have any trouble parting with, because I want you to have some early successes and say, I got rid of 8 bags of stuff and it wasn't hard. 4 comforters that I didn't need, I dropped off the Humane Society. They take towels. And, I lived through that. It wasn't emotional and I got that all done. So don't start with the hardest things. Get some early successes. Also, don't tackle huge jobs all at once. Break them into smaller parts. So you can, if you have a really busy china closet or pantry, don't say, I'm sorting the china closet. Say, I'm doing one shelf. And so that you can finish that and feel you met your goal. When you have a big project and you take everything out, you've got stuff everywhere, it feels overwhelming, and then people stop. So I recommend, people say, where do I start? We say, start with a drawer. Good
idea.
And I also like to finish an area and then finish a room. And I might pick the least challenging room in the house. Maybe it's a guest bedroom and you go, well, that's not emotional. Mm-hmm. Great. Sort through every piece of art, everything in the guest bedroom closet, every single thing there, and say, I have gotten rid of the things. I've made my decisions. That room is done. You can cross it off your mental list. An entire room is finished. What a lot of people do is a little bit everywhere. So they have parted with stuff, but nothing feels done. And psychologically, we need to feel something is getting done.
I like that. Yeah.
So those are some tips on downsizing.
Yeah, I like that. Thanks. So you, in your book, you're talking about revisioning the second half of life. And one of the things you talk about is your legacy and what that means to you and how that looks. Would you share some of that with us?
I'll share something about my legacy and a legacy that 2 sisters created.
Okay.
I feel I have a 2-part legacy. One part is something I'm very proud of. It's the company I created and ran for 25 years, Moving Solutions. I had a wonderful team. We touched many, many lives. They humbled me every day in what they did, and I loved being part of that team and leading it. But I have moved on. I've sold the business. I'm in a new phase. And my legacy now, I hope, is being very mindful and grateful for the phase of life that I'm in. About 4 years ago, my husband had a very severe heart attack. And at first, it looked like we didn't know if he would live. And then he didn't look like a candidate for either open heart surgery or a stent. Fast forward, he did have open heart surgery, even though he was high risk, and he's fine. He had a great recovery.
Thank goodness.
But when he was contemplating living life with heart failure, he said, if I could look at the water, make food for my wife, and walk my dogs, it would be enough. But what we realized is he's fine. We do live by the water and look at it every day. We walk our dogs. We have meals together. We have so much more than enough. We are really grateful. So we recently both got tattoos saying the Hebrew word dayenu, which means enough.
It's enough.
And all of our friends, you got a tattoo. We wanted to do something bold. We did it together. And to say we are really grateful to be in this age and to have each other and to be healthy. We know life can change in a second. Mm-hmm. So we want to live boldly, but we are really grateful that we are, because a lot of people, I have friends and they're working 1 million hours a day still, and I want to say, if you can afford to not work, live. This is your decade. I think the 70s are like a gift decade. Most of us aren't frail yet. We're fine. Maybe we'll never be frail.
Right.
It's like, this could be the best decade of my life. So that's part of the revisioning, seeing that possibility. And I dedicated Squint to the river. And the editor said, you don't dedicate a book to a river. And I said, but I spent a lot of time kayaking. And what I realized is that people would say, well, don't you like it most when you're going with the wind and with the current? And I said, well, that's very pleasant, but going against the current can be really exhilarating. I don't want to let go of that. That's what makes life exciting.
Yeah.
And so I dedicated it because and maybe aging is like that too. It has a lot of challenges. Mm-hmm. I'm not sugarcoating it.
Right.
It's like paddling upwind, but there's still going to be a lot of joy. And do I have time to tell a story of a wonderful legacy?
Yes, you do, because I love that story in your book. Okay. Yeah.
There are 2 sisters that I know, and their mom died, and they were going through her belongings. And these sisters have a very close relationship. And they agreed about everything, who would get what. But there were 2 things they couldn't decide upon. And one was a very pretty ring that their mom had purchased. And so it wasn't a wedding ring, or it didn't have huge family emotional value passed down. Their mom bought it. The other one was a silver vase that their mom had, and she had bought at an auction. And both girls married men whose last name started with F, and the vase had an F. So that was kind of odd that it worked out that way.
Right.
So those are the 2 things they couldn't decide upon. And the way they settled it is that one took the ring, one took the vase, and the first of every year, New Year's Day, every year, they get together and they switch. And whoever has the vase fills it with a dozen white roses, which were their mother's favorite flower. And what I love about this is that they are giving such a legacy to their children about how something is handled, about that it's not about ownership, it's about relationship.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful legacy. They're giving a legacy of how they handled something, not a legacy of belongings that they passed on.
Yeah. I love that solution. That was just a brilliant solution.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Quick question. Francis says, is there a short list of items, financial and legal or others, to share with your adult children as anticipating their parents' move?
There are lists. I will send you ones. I don't have it. I don't have access to it right now, but I'll send you some lists that you can post, Wendy, that these are sort of important paper lists.
Okay.
I will share with you that I began creating that for ourselves and for our adult children. And I'm someone that hates paperwork. And I found it, oddly, to my astonishment, I have liked doing it. I have felt more in control. And though I hate paperwork, I ended up putting everything on my laptop. And then I back it up and I have sent the file.
For sure.
I know where to find things.
Yeah.
And there were lots of things that it made me, I would say, well, we have no mortgage on the house at the shore. I'm writing them. And then I said, where's our deed? I don't know if you remember that. I better go find that out. So yes, I did. And here's the hard copy. Here's a scan of the duplicate. But they raised good questions while I was doing it.
Yeah.
That were important that I checked into.
That's great.
Or we own both of our cars. Where are the titles for our cars?
Right.
So it worked out well. I am glad that I've been in that process. I'm not done it yet. I gave myself 9 months just to finish it. I started in June because I knew that I wanted to not have it consume my life, but it's very doable.
Yeah.
And you'll feel super good when you finish.
Right. And it is a good thing to share with your kids. So before we wrap up, I always try to end with a couple of good takeaways from my guest for our Hey Boomer community. And there've been so much good advice that you've shared with us, Margit. So I wonder if there's one or two other takeaways or that you want to reinforce.
One takeaway would be to be present. That is part of what Bill and I are trying to do in terms of our being very grateful for the phase of life. But I also look back on so much of my professional life where I was raising my kids or they were grown with Bill, when I was present in body, but not really in mind. I had my emails coming to my iPhone. I was thinking about work. So there were lots of times that I wasn't really there, even when I was physically there. And I look back now and go, that's what I regret. Not having given all of me when I was supposedly there. And that this is the time when we can be more present for each other, and kinder to each other, and being intentional, taking responsibility for the quality of your life. There are lots of things that happen to us health-wise that we can't control, but I think we have to take responsibility for creating a safe environment. We think about avoiding steps. We think about how are we going to minimize risk, live a life to the fullest, and that we can't sort of just ignore that. Being an ostrich doesn't work. Right. And we see friends who we think are doing that, but I think it will catch up with them. So the way to be in control is to be planful.
Yeah, and intentional. And
Yes.
So you can find Margit on her website, Margit, Margit, Novack, Novack.com. And there are ways to find her book there, Squint, Revisioning the Second Half of Life. Also, you can find her contact information there if you have additional questions for her. Margit, this has been so helpful to so many people that have been listening, and I really appreciate all that you've shared.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure to have you, and congratulations on your championship award.
Thank you very much. That was a surprise, and it did make me proud.
It should make you proud. That was a big one. Let me just remind everybody to subscribe to the email list or encourage your friends to subscribe. The link is bit.ly/heyboomer-subscribe. And come and join us tomorrow. Tell your friends who are struggling with what's next in their retirement to come to bit.ly/heyboomer_what's_next. And next Monday, my guest is a man named, or who calls himself Gramps Jeffrey. His real name is Mark Jacobs. And before he became Gramps Jeffrey, he was writing books about retailing to help small entrepreneurs compete against the big guys. But during the pandemic, he was kind of sheltering in place with his family, which included 6 small grandchildren. And so he got a front row seat to see how these children interact and how grandparents can influence and be involved in their grandchildren's lives. So he wrote a book called I Don't Want to Turn 3. And he is going to share some of his ideas with us about grandparenting next week. And I just want to leave you all with the thought that you can live with passion, you can live with relevance, and you can live with courage. And you are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. My name is Wendy Green with Margit Novack, and this has been Hey Boomer.